The night was darker than usual in Ebony Village. The moon, usually bright and round, hid behind thick clouds, as if it refused to watch what was happening. For years, the villagers whispered the name Clementine with fear. She was not just a woman, she was a witch, one whose shadow swallowed joy, whose eyes made mothers hide their children, and whose laughter turned sweet harvests bitter. Nobody wanted to marry her. The men of Ebony Village would rather live alone than bring her into their homes. Her very presence was like a curse. And so, while other women danced at weddings, Clementine would sit alone in her hut, whispering to shadows, feeding on the silence that grew thicker around her each year. But witches do not remain alone forever. Some say loneliness makes them more dangerous. Others say loneliness makes them desperate. For Clementine, it was both. Then came Obi. Obi was a man of strong shoulders but weak wisdom. He was the kind of man who believed words over actions, and gifts over truth. He had heard the warnings about Clementine, but when she brought him baskets of yams and jars of palm oil, when she smiled at him with teeth that glimmered too sharp under the moonlight, he believed he had found a wife who would make him rich. The village youths shook their heads. The elders muttered. Even Obi's own mother wailed in the night, warning her son not to marry the witch. But Obi was stubborn. He was a fool, a proud fool. And so the wedding took place. No drums were played, and no flutes were sang. The villagers refused to gather. Only Clementine, dressed in red cloth that shimmered like blood under the sun, and Obi, smiling foolishly in his white attire, stood before the shrine. When the priest asked the gods to bless their union, the wind blew through the trees. The fire on the altar went out on its own. The priest trembled but continued. Clementine's eyes glowed faintly. Only Obi did not notice. That night, Obi entered his new wife's hut. But the walls whispered. The fire refused to stay lit. And as Clementine served him a meal, the food on his plate moved as if it breathed. But, still, Obi laughed. He ate the food and also called Clementine my sweet wife. The next morning, the villagers found him pale, trembling, and sweating. Yet, when they asked him what had happened, Obi only smiled weakly and said, "Marriage is sweet." But deep inside his hut, Clementine's laughter echoed, a sound that made even the crows on the rooftops scatter into the sky. Obi thought he had won. While other men in Ebony Village struggled to feed their families, his new wife brought him meals that overflowed, yams that never ran out, and meat so tender they melted in the mouth. His hut was never empty of food, never lacking in wine. Neighbors watched with jealousy, whispering, "Maybe Clementine is not as bad as we thought." But whispers die quickly, and truth lasts longer. At night, Obi could not sleep. He would hear footsteps pacing in circles though the doors were locked. Sometimes, when he reached for Clementine in the dark, his hands touched not skin but something cold, like wet clay. When the cock crowed, he would wait to find her sleeping peacefully beside him, her face glowing as if nothing had happened. Still, Obi said nothing. He was a fool, but he was a proud fool. Months passed, and Clementine gave birth to her first child. A baby boy. The villagers did not celebrate. No songs were sung, no drums were beaten. They only muttered, "A child born of a witch will not grow well." But Clementine adored her son. She rocked him in her arms, whispering strange lullabies that no one else understood. Her husband smiled proudly, ignoring the uneasy silence that followed wherever they went. Then the baby fell sick. It began with cries in the night, sharp cries that pierced through the village like a blade. The healer came, but when she touched the child, she recoiled as if her hands had been burned. "This sickness is not of men," the healer whispered. "It is of shadows." The next morning, the child was gone. Obi searched everywhere. He tore through the hut, screamed into the night, but Clementine only sat by the fire, her lips stained dark red, her eyes distant. When Obi begged her, she laughed softly and said, "Hunger has no boundaries, even for a mother." The villagers shook with horror. They said she had eaten her own child. But Obi, too ashamed to admit the truth, told them thieves had stolen the baby in the night. He chose lies over shame, silence over reality. Yet the whispers spread. Soon after, Clementine bore a second child. A girl this time, with eyes as bright as morning dew. For a short while, joy returned to Obi's heart. But just like before, the child grew weak too soon. This time, Obi swore to guard her himself. He held the baby all night, keeping her away from Clementine's arms. But hunger is patient. One night, as Obi drifted into sleep, he awoke to find Clementine crouched by the mat. Her face floated too close to the child's chest, her mouth opening wider than a human mouth should. Obi leapt up, pulling the baby away, but it was too late. The little girl was already limp. The fire crackled. Clementine licked her lips. And Obi screamed, a scream that woke the entire village. From then on, no one doubted it. Clementine had eaten her own children. But what shocked the villagers most was Obi's choice. He did not leave her. He stayed. Perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of shame, perhaps because the witch had chained his heart in a spell he could not escape. Years passed. Clementine bore a third child. This one survived longer, strong and healthy, a boy who ran and played by the stream. The village began to hope maybe this one would live. But then, on a stormy night, the boy vanished too. His small sandals were found by the fire, but his body was never seen again. Only Clementine smiled, her teeth gleaming, her belly rounder than before. This time, Obi did not speak. He did not cry. He only sat in silence, rocking back and forth, his eyes empty like a broken pot. The village youths gathered. They had had enough. She is killing her own blood. If we leave her, she will finish us all. They sharpened their machetes, lit torches, and marched to Clementine's hut. But when they arrived, she stood at the doorway, waiting. She laughed when she saw their weapons. A laugh so sharp, so piercing, it made even the strongest of them tremble. "You think death will take me?" she hissed. "I have called death many times. Death fears me. Death refuses me." And indeed, when they struck her, she fell. But before their eyes, her body rose again. When they burned her hut, the flames danced around her but did not consume her. When they buried her in the ground, the soil rejected her, spitting her out before dawn. Clementine could not die. The villagers wailed in fear. Mothers clutched their children tighter. The youths, once so bold, refused to speak her name again. Even Obi, once a fool, now broken, sat outside his hut, staring into the sky, whispering, "Marriage is sweet, marriage is sweet," though his voice was hollow. But Clementine? She walked freely through the village, smiling at their terror. For she was a wife, a mother, and a witch who carried hunger in her belly and eternity in her bones. And death itself refused to take her. The village could no longer endure it. Clementine had eaten her children, one after the other, and yet she walked about as though she were untouchable. Mothers spat when she passed, fathers shook their heads, and children ran at the sight of her shadow. But Obi, her husband, was broken. Once proud and foolish, now he was a shell of a man. He sat every day under the big Iroko tree, muttering to himself, "Marriage is sweet, marriage is sweet," but his eyes were empty. The laughter that once filled his chest was gone, and his family name was spoken only in pity. One day, an old traveler entered Ebony Village. His beard was white like chalk, and his staff was carved with strange signs. The villagers, tired and desperate, rushed to him. They told him about Clementine, the witch who ate her children, the wife who could not die, the curse that had destroyed their peace. The old traveler listened silently, then asked, "Does she have a mother?" The villagers were surprised. Clementine's mother had died long ago, buried at the edge of the forest. Or so they thought. The traveler nodded slowly. A witch who eats her own blood is not just cursed, she is bound. The spirits she feeds do not give her peace. They keep her chained to hunger and pain. If she ever remembers the love of a true mother, her curse will break. The villagers trembled. They knew Clementine had killed even her own family. How could she ever remember love again? But Obi, broken as he was, lifted his head. Tears filled his eyes. "Then let me remind her," he whispered. That night, Obi returned to his hut. Clementine sat by the fire, humming her strange lullaby, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Obi knelt before her, and for the first time in years, he did not curse her, scream, and he did not hide. He spoke gently. "Clementine," he said, his voice trembling. "You were not always like this. You were once a child too. Somebody carried you. Somebody sang to you. Somebody loved you before the darkness came." For a moment, the witch's face softened. Her humming stopped. Her eyes flickered like dying fire. Obi continued, "Remember your mother, Clementine. Remember her arms, her voice. Remember what it felt like to be loved, not feared." Clementine's hands shook. She pressed them to her face, whispering in broken tones, "Mama, Mama." And then, something strange happened. The hut grew quiet, and the wind stilled. From the shadows, 3 faint lights appeared. The spirits of her children, the ones she had eaten, floated before her. They were not angry. They were not vengeful. They only looked at her with sad, innocent eyes. "Mama," they whispered softly, "we forgive you." Clementine screamed. Her body shook violently, her eyes rolled back, and then, for the first time, she fell. The hunger left her belly, the shadows fled her hut, and the glow in her eyes vanished. She was no longer a witch. She was only a broken woman, lying in her husband's arms, weeping like a child. The villagers came rushing. They expected to see a demon. Instead, they saw Clementine kneeling in the dust, her face streaked with tears. For the first time in years, she looked human. The old traveler raised his staff and said, "The curse is broken. The witch who ate her children has been freed. But freedom does not erase consequences. Let her live with the memory of her children. Let her teach others the pain of greed, the emptiness of hunger, and the power of love." From that day, Clementine changed. She no longer whispered to shadows. Instead, she became a healer, tending to sick children, feeding orphans, and warning young mothers never to forget the sacred bond of family. The villagers forgave her slowly, and though the scars of the past remained, she became a living lesson of redemption. Obi, though still a fool in many eyes, stood by her side. And together, they grew old, not cursed, not feared, but humbled. The story teaches us that evil always destroys itself. Family is sacred, greed blinds but humility saves, forgiveness heals even the deepest wounds, and no one is beyond change. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Until next time, this is Reta. If you like what I'm doing, please subscribe, like, share and comment below so that I will know your opinion. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you will be the first to know when the next video drops. Peace out.